Good morning to our friends in North and South America. Good afternoon to our friends in the UK and the EU in Europe. Good early evening to our friends in Dubai and India. Good evening to our friends in Thailand, Singapore, Malaysia, Japan, Indonesia. A good late evening to our good friends down in Australia. Nice to see you all. Share some time with you. I believe we have some questions, JC.
Yeah. Question 1. Hi, Ajahn. Thanks for making time to share the Dhamma with us today through the questions. May I know if there's certain linkage to karma if one is born as female or male? Is it true that for male, one has accumulated much merits compared to female, or both are equally the same? I ask because I realize there is a rule that for males to renounce, they can return to lay life for up to 7 times, but for female, they can't do so. I'm curious, why is this so? Thank you.
In terms of the question, in the time of the Buddha, Lord Buddha gave the allowance for bhikkhus to disrobe and reordain up to 7 times, but not for women. I think we need to understand the cultural context of ancient India, where essentially women in that day and age were considered property, essentially. They were the daughters of their fathers, they were the wives of their husbands, and they did not have, 2,600 years ago, they did not have the freedoms that a lot of modern people take for granted, people who live in liberal Western style democracies. So 2,600 years ago, a very, very conservative, ancient, traditional culture. And men, on the other hand, were considered to have to be the supporter of the family. So even in this day and age, if you go to the market in Bodh the shops, you will find mostly men, and 2,600 years later, and mostly the women are at home. And they tend to have many children, so they have a lot of work at home. So I think for the men, it might be the case that you go forth, but at a certain point, mum is sick. She may have given you her blessing, but mum is sick now, and you may have had to go home and take care of things for a period of time, still having faith, wanting to ordain again, etc. But in general, the men had more liberty, depending on what class you were. Of course, there was a very large slave kind of lower caste, so the men in that caste would not have had much freedom. And women were also seen as more vulnerable and more delicate. And I think in general, if you were to talk in terms of generalities, if a certain situation gives more liberty and more freedom, then I think you have to deduce from that is a result of merit. If another situation has less liberty and freedom, well, then you would assume that is a result of some karmas are manifesting. So in general, at least traditional Asian cultures would tend to see it, that men in that life, that they're born men, are experiencing more freedom. The thing about generalization is that there's always many millions of exceptions. So there's no absolute. And when I like to think of the example of Meiji Gao, there's a wonderful biography which is available at my website to be downloaded as a PDF. I think you can probably get it as an ebook at the Forest Dhamma, at the Wat Pavantar, Ajahn Mahabua's people. You can probably get that as an ebook for free. So Mechi Gao is a very interesting situation because she had a difficult childhood. She had an unhappy marriage, and she became an arahant. So it's just a very interesting example that is worth paying attention to. So obviously heavy karmas were ripening, and but what you notice is that she was a gifted meditator, and even as a young child, 12, 13, 14, she has Lumpur Mun walking past her house on alms round, and Lumpur Mun encouraging her personally in her meditation practice and giving her instruction. So yes, she's born as a woman where she has many domestic tasks, but because of the merit previously accumulated, which is manifesting in her life, she has the greatest arahant of the age walking in front of her house daily and giving her personal instruction. So this example is instructive. If you have the merit, the master will come. And if you have the abilities and you apply yourself, despite the fact that you're in a difficult situation, you can develop. So Lumpur Mun saw that Mechi Gao had amazing samadhi, so she could travel ghost, hell, heaven realms, and she could see amazing things. The problem with that is it's a bit fascinating. And it's true that the samadhi was great. It's true that her abilities were impressive. But because she was attached to them, Lumpur Mun could see that she was going to need a particularly fierce teacher to kind of wake her up. And so I think quite a bit of time went by, an unhappy marriage, etc., etc. She went forth, she became a nun. And she was a nun in a time of communist insurgencies and American war efforts against communists in Laos and Vietnam. So I think when she was a nun, there were like bombs being dropped around her and stuff. I mean, serious, challenging phenomenon. And then Ajahn Mun had seen that in the future at some point a teacher would come along who could teach her. And so that teacher was Lungta Mahabua. So for a certain period of time, decades, Ajahn Mun could see, okay, well, she's not really doing anything wrong. She's attached to her samadhi, she's attached to her samatha, but she has great faith. And samadhi is a good thing. And so Lungta Mahabua came along and taught her when she could take it. And so he really scolded her. And she cried. And, this is teaching people who become a bit stubborn or a bit attached or a bit confident. They need some tough love. They need a heavy teaching. So she set her resolve on letting go of her attachment. And Ajahn Mahabua pointed out to her where her attachments were and scolded her for not having let go of them and done better. And so she walked meditation all evening. And once she stopped crying, well, she cried, but she practiced. She practiced while crying until the tears fade. And then she did attain to a higher level. So, yeah, she's a great example because, self-righteousness is not a religion that ever liberated anybody. And so to spend a lot of time feeling like things should be one way, things shouldn't be a different way, isn't going to get anybody enlightened. But damn hard work, not complaining too much, just getting on with it, with whatever opportunity your life gives you, just wholeheartedly embracing it and practicing as much as you can. That does liberate people. So I really love Mechi Gao's life and example, and I mention her frequently. And of course, in the time of the Buddha, there were the great disciples, the great bhikkhunis, and some of their lives, really awesome practitioners. So since it's brought up, I might read a couple. Looking at my audience here, I'll just read a few paragraphs from a couple because they are inspiring. And it just kind of points to the fact that you will see from the context the way that women were kind of considered as property and seen as delicate. But if they had the spiritual power, they could and did liberate themselves. So I'm I'm going to read a few paragraphs from the life of Khema. So Khema was the foremost bhikkhuni in wisdom, just as Sariputta was the foremost bhikkhu in wisdom. There were bhikkhunis who were foremost. Khema was foremost in wisdom. Just as the Buddha has appointed two chief disciples in the order of monks, Sariputta and Moggallana, he likewise named two women his foremost disciples in the Bhikkhuni Sangha, the order of nuns. These two were the bhikkhunis Upalawana and Khema, the former excelling in psychic power, the latter in wisdom. The Buddha has held up these two as the models and examples for all the nuns to emulate, the standard against which other nuns could evaluate themselves. The name Khema means security and is a synonym for Nibbana. The nun Khema belonged to a royal family from the land of Magadha. She was extremely beautiful and fair to behold. And when she reached marriageable age, she became one of the chief consorts of King Bimbisara. This king was a stream enterer and a generous benefactor of the Blessed One. So just looking at the merits of Khema, she is born into a royal family. She marries, becomes one of the wives of the king. But that king is a stream enterer, has attained the first level of enlightenment. So that's a very auspicious marriage. He has donated his own bamboo grove, King Bimbisara, to the Sangha and constantly looked after the monks with great solicitude. But although Khema often heard about the Buddha from the king, she resisted going to see him, fearful that he would find fault with her beauty of form and preach to her about the vanity of sensual pleasures. So she knows she's into beauty. She knows she's into sensual pleasures, and she doesn't want to hear anything bad about it. No, I'm not going to go and see the Buddha. I'm going to enjoy my beauty and my sensual pleasures. She was tightly attached. The king, however, found a way to induce her to listen to the teaching. He hired a troupe of singers to sing songs to her in praise of the harmony, peacefulness, and beauty of the Bamboo Grove Monastery. And because Khema loved the beauties of nature, she decided to visit there. So you see, you have a very compassionate and clever king thinking about how he's going to help his wife, one of his wives. Decked out in royal splendor with silk and sandalwood, she went to the monastery and was gradually drawn to the hall where the Buddha was preaching. The Buddha, who read her thoughts, created by his psychic powers a beautiful young woman standing beside him, fanning him. Khema was enthralled by this lovely woman and thought to herself, never before have I seen such a woman. I myself do not come within even a fraction of her beauty. Surely those who say the ascetic Gautama disparages the beauty of form must be misrepresenting him. The Buddha then made this created image gradually change from youth to middle age, and then to old age, with broken teeth, grey hair, and wrinkled skin, until it finally fell to the ground lifeless. Only then did she realize the vanity of external beauty and the fleeting nature of life. She thought, has such a body come to be wrecked like that? Then my body too must share that fate. The Buddha read her mind and said, Khema, behold this mass of elements, diseased, impure, decaying, trickling all over and oozing. It is desired only by fools. At the conclusion of the stanza, Khema was established in the fruit of stream entry, but the Buddha continued to teach her, concluding his sermon with another verse. Those enslaved by lust drift down the stream, as a spider glides on its self-spun web. Having cut off even this, the wise wander, indifferent to the pleasures they've renounced. Khema penetrated the sermon fully, and right on the spot, while still dressed in her royal attire, she attained arahantship, together with the analytical knowledges. Therefore, having received her husband's permission, she joined the order of nuns. So that's pretty fabulous, isn't it? There she is, the beautiful princess in her royal regalia, one of the arahants. You imagine how much merit she has. So of course, that's not any kind of a fluke. This, the story of her life goes back thousands of eons to where she observed bhikkhunis who had great wisdom and where she aspired to be just like them, and then assiduously laid the causes so that she could have such an impressive last life. And there's another one, two of my favorites. Are you still interested? Shall we talk about fabulous bhikkhunis a bit more? So the next one is the debating ascetic. This is very, very dramatic. Bada Kundala Kesa, the debating ascetic. So these are from this book, The Great Disciples of the Buddha. It has male and female great disciples from the Wisdom publications. In Rajagaha, the capital of the kingdom of Magadha, there lived a girl of good family named Bada, the only daughter of a rich merchant. Her parents kept her confined on the top floor of a 7-storied mansion, for she had a passionate nature and they were afraid that her awakening sexuality would lead her into trouble. One day, Bada heard a commotion down below in the street, and when she looked out the window, she saw a criminal being led to the place of execution. He was a young man of station who had become a thief and was caught committing a robbery. As soon as Bada set eyes upon him, love arose in her heart, and she lay down on her bed, refusing to eat unless she could have him for her husband. Her parents tried to dissuade her from such folly, but she would see no alternative. Thus her rich father sent a generous bribe to the guard and asked him to bring the man to his mansion. The guard did as he was instructed, substituting a local derelict for the robber. The merchant gave the robber to his daughter in marriage, hopeful that his character might alter through this sudden change of fortune. Soon after the wedding, however, the bridegroom became obsessed with a desire to take possession of his wife's jewelry. Thus he told her that while he was being led to the execution block, he had vowed that if he could escape death, he would make an offering to a certain mountain deity. He urged Bada to put on all her finest ornaments and accompany him to this deity's haunt, a cliff off the top of a steep mountain. When they came to the cliff, called Robber's Precipice, because it was here that the king would have criminals thrown to their death, her husband demanded that Bada hand over all her jewelry to him. Bada saw only one way to escape this predicament. She asked her husband permission to pay final obeisance to him, and as she embraced him, she threw him over the cliff to be dashed to pieces down below. Burdened by the enormity of her deed, Bada had no desire to return to lay life. Can you imagine? You've fallen in love. You've become deluded. You think, if only I can have this handsome man, I'll be happy. Come, my darling, let's go and make offerings to the mountain deity. You get there and he says, give me all your jewelry. Oh, how terribly disheartening and sobering. And then you push him to his death. Wow. There's no going back to the 7th floor, is there? So, burdened by the enormity of her deed, Bada had no desire to return to lay life, for sensual pleasures and possessions no longer had any meaning for her. Therefore, she decided to become a wandering ascetic. First, she entered the order of the Jains, and as a special penance, her hair was torn out by the roots when she ordained. Whoa, tough. But it grew again and became very curly, for which reason she was called Kundala Kesa, which means curly hair. The teaching of the Jain sect did not satisfy her, so she became a solitary wanderer, traveling through India. So you can see this very, very strong-willed person who was very passionate at first. When she is sobered from the folly of passions, she becomes a very, very tough and singularly determined, brave woman. Traveling through India, she visited many spiritual teachers, learned their doctrines, and thereby obtained an excellent knowledge of religious texts and philosophies. She became especially skilled in the art of debate, and in a short time, she became one of the most famous debaters in India. Whenever she entered a town, she would make a sand pile and stick a rose apple branch into it, announcing that whoever would engage in debate with her should notify her by trampling upon the sand pile. One day she came to Savatthi and again erected her little monument. At that time, the Venerable Sariputta was staying at the Jetavana monastery. He heard of the arrival of Bada, and as a sign of his willingness for debate, he told several children to go and trample on the sand pile. Thereupon Bada went to Jetavana, confident of victory, accompanied by a large number of people. She put a number of questions to Sariputta, and he answered them all until she had nothing more to ask. Then Sariputta questioned her. Already the first question affected Bada profoundly, namely, what is the One? She remained silent, unable to determine what the elder could have intended. Surely, she pondered, he did not mean God, or Brahman, or the infinite. But what was it then? The answer should have been nutriment, because all beings are sustained by food. Admitting defeat, Bada asked Sariputta for the answer, but he said that he would tell her only if she entered the Buddhist order. The elder then sent her to the bhikkhunis and had her ordained, and after a few days, she attained arahantship. So once again, you can see that if the female practitioner has the requisite merits, Sariputta will invite her to become a nun and personally teach her. So these are, I always like to point to these aspects of the whole conundrum: equality among genders, equality among opportunities. Of course, merit is a large factor, and so are spiritual qualities. And if we are diligent, practicing sincerely to the extent that we can where we are, I have faith that the next opportunity presents itself. We have to assiduously lay the causes. So that's different ways to approach this, but that's my preferred one. And I sometimes, as you know, I have some connections with some monks with some special abilities. And so without mentioning names, I have one lay disciple, a wealthy lady, who wanted to know, well, she likes being a woman, and she doesn't appear to be lacking in merits or intelligence. And she wanted to know if her being born a woman was a result of good or bad karma. So she asked one enlightened master who has abilities, and the enlightened master said, no, you got born as a woman again because you like being a woman, and the thing that you like is silks and laces and jewelries and shoes and perfumes. You really like this stuff. That's why you keep being born as a woman. And it's true, because she had to admit it. Like, she works very, very hard, but when she got time off, she would go shopping for silk scarves in Paris or Japan, or she had the money to do it. So you can only have so many handbags and pairs of shoes before you begin to wonder, maybe there's more to life, And now, since she's been meditating diligently for 5 years, she is not as interested in silks and jewelry and perfumes, and she's much more interested in pilgrimage and retreat opportunities. And she decided that she wanted to be born as a man, and that was not my recommendation. But she just told me one day, next lifetime I want to be a man. Really? Because when I first started to teach her and train her 7 years ago, she wanted to be just like Nang Musaka, the foremost female patron of the Buddha. And I'm like, why? She said, well, I want to be able to dress beautifully and smell nice and become a stream enterer as a laywoman, where I don't have to give up looking beautiful. Fortunately, she's developed more resolve and sensibly aspires to be born. So what I recommend to people, I don't recommend to people to make an aspiration to be born as a man or a woman, because in samsara, situations keep changing. For example, if you were born in Korea or Taiwan in these days, I think you will find there are many more nuns than monks. And so your opportunity to train as a Buddhist monastic in Taiwan or Korea would probably be better as a woman. So you don't know. On Kuan Yin Island, Putuo-san, one of the holy mountains, apparently at one point there were 500 monasteries, and most of them were nunneries for about 1,000 years. So, the aspiration I recommend people to make is, may I be born in a situation where I will meet Dhamma, and that I may practice Dhamma and meet teachers and have the opportunity to practice, and that I will practice. Because as we've seen, bhikkhunis were arahants, Mechi Gao became an arahant. The princess became an arahant dressed as a princess. So the potential is there, but you need the circumstances that support your practice. So just have that firm aspiration in every life. May I meet with the Dhamma, and may I have an opportunity to practice. And when I meet with it and have that opportunity, I determine that I will practice. And then don't worry about the other details. Don't worry about the country. Don't worry about the gender. Just set the intention that you will practice. That's my recommendation.
Thank you so much, Ajahn, for those inspiring stories. Ajahn, question 2. Hi, Ajahn, may I know how to overcome anger and jealousy? Thank you.
JC, there was another question you sent to me later. Can we combine these two questions because they're similar, I think?
Yes, Ajahn, I will read that as well. Dear Ajahn Achalo, in our Dhamma practice, we try to be humble, have sympathetic joy rather than being jealous, and not attached to a self. But for those who are not arahants yet or are not actively practicing Dhamma, like my children and other loved ones, what is your advice for when we become irritated by others who appear not considerate, thoughtless, who appear boastful, showing off, who appear to be jealous of our good situation? Perhaps it is our minds creating stories, but assuming that there is some truth to our thoughts based on past history with the other person, how should we deal with inconsiderate, boastful, or jealous people? Thank you for your help.
I'm going to tell you a couple of little stories just to kind of make a point and set a bit of context. I think sometimes people look at monks in monasteries, lovely monastery, nice community, a lot of support, and then kind of assume that the monastics don't have to deal with these worldly dhammas as much as lay people. So just to give you a little bit of a glimpse, among all of the support that I've received, including an offering of citizenship by the Thai king and a title and resources to build a very suitable dwelling, it's a room I'm able to teach you from, a lot of support, obviously. At the same time, there is a certain ex-minister locally who spreads rumors about me. He says that the reason the monastery bought so much land is so that as the value goes up, when I get older, I'll be able to sell it for tremendous profit. Not only that, so my whole intention in getting land around the monastery is to protect the peacefulness and to establish a forest, which we have done. And the establishing of a forest is a great deal of work and costs a lot of money, and there's a lot of labor of love, and it's very altruistic. And I know for myself that I only had wholesome aspirations. This same ex-minister also said that the nice lay accommodation we built was so that we could charge lay people 5,000 baht a night to stay at the monastery. So he doesn't come to the monastery, but what's going on with him is, I think people can't understand something outside of their own frame of thinking. So if it was him, if he was a monk, he would be buying land to sell it to make money in the future. If he was a monk, he would be charging people money. So of course, people come and stay here by donation, and no donation is accepted. No donation is expected. So it's absolutely untrue. But I just point to the fact that even good monks have to put up with very unreasonable projections from unsavory characters. And another thing that happened was one of last year's Katina. Sometimes I don't like to talk about these things because it's not inspiring, but other times it's nice to talk about things because it's like, this is samsara, guys. This is where we are. This is what it's like. So one of last year's Katina donors, main Katina sponsors, never got around to depositing the other half of the donations that he had collected. That's right. A main Katina host stole half the donations that he pledged to the monastery. That's right. It's such a stupid thing to do. And you know, obviously really evil. And you have a Sangha headed by an arahant on the occasion. You have the generosity of hundreds of lay people. And since that time, very interestingly, I won't mention any names, but very interestingly, that person was looking like he was going to have a good career and about to get a promotion. And the promotion never happened. And the people in the company who were interested in him lost their interest in him, and various personal things did not go well for him. And so, you know, it's a short-term benefit, but creating enormous karmic obstruction. I doubt that this person's ventures will be successful or effective for quite some time, and it's very unfortunate. So the point is, I, like you, have plenty of opportunities to practice with feeling frustrated and disappointed by people who demonstrate uninspiring qualities. And obviously, it's, you know, it's samsara, and we've got many lives behind us, and these are the workings of karma. So the way I ratify it is like, well, to have a monk who you believe to be an arahant come to your Katina ceremony and lead the sangha, that's enormous merit, and you need to have quite a bit of merit for that to occur. But one of the things that people don't realize and is worth considering is that when merit is ripe, large amount of merit is ripening, then you're also going to have some karma ripening as well. So it's like some heavy karma also often arises when we're doing very auspicious things. We have to, there's even a saying in Thailand, Man me ma, barami me gur, which means if Mara doesn't come, the barami doesn't get made. So you don't get to make the virtue unless Mara comes. So we have to pass through these trials and tribulations. And as a teacher and as an abbot, I'm already shaking my head. Maybe, you know, when people do something which I could consider to be inappropriate or not so inspiring, or maybe they could have done better, or if a person makes a pledge that they don't keep, or a promise that they renege on, or talks about their good qualities but's not perfectly truthful, the amount of times that I could be justified in saying to somebody, you said that you were going to keep this commitment and you didn't keep it, very bad. You're saying that you did this much where actually you did less. Don't overestimate or don't boast. You know, the amount of times where I could scold or admonish people for not quite being as inspiring as they aspire to be, probably 49 out of 50 times I don't say anything. Just as a bit of a perspective, 49 out of 50 times I train myself. Be patient with this person, be forgiving. It doesn't mean I never train. It just means that I will think very carefully about when and where and how I'll say something. Because sometimes if you admonish somebody in the wrong moment, they get dejected, they lose their confidence, they hold a grudge, they fall away. So you have to be very, very patient and very, very forgiving. And so the way we practice it is, yes, people should be humble. But in my experience, the person who has to be humble is oneself. And life gives us plenty of opportunities to practice being humble. And, you know, Ajahn Chah says, one should place 95% of one's attention on oneself. So what qualities do I still have that are unwholesome that I need to abandon? What positive traits are weak that I need to strengthen? And so this needs to be where we, and so, but I think the reflection on karma and many, many past lives and the stubbornness of kilesa and the thickness of ignorance, we have to have a respect for it. We have to understand that people's bad habits are very deep. ignorance and delusion is very powerful. Samsara is very, very, very long. And most people change slowly, not quickly. So most people are not like Kema and this matted hair ascetic who, when hearing a few teachings, become enlightened. That's people who've been working on it for a very, very long time. And you can see even those people had very negative tendencies until they met the correct influences which helped them abandon those. So in terms of how do we deal with people who are jealous, people who are not grateful, people who are boastful, you're mindfully aware of it as a kilesa, as an unwholesome quality. And you practice patience and forgiveness, cultivate loving kindness. And when it comes time to admonish, you try to do so in a timely and skillful way, in a way when the person is receptive and where there might be benefit. So you don't want to get into contentiousness. Just if you know that, I remember when I first began meditating daily and I came back from Thailand, I used to argue with my parents because I didn't like their political views and views on various things. And when I came back from Thailand after meditating every day for 9 months, I just had the basic insight. If I argue with them, they're still not going to change their views. So why argue with them? And so I still didn't like their views, but I had the insight, arguing with them is pointless. So I stopped arguing with them. And my mum comes to me and she says, you know, part of the reason I hassled you so much when you were a teenager was I just didn't know what someone like you would do with their life. And but she's like, but now I can see, I always knew you'd find your niche, and I can see that you have. You seem much more happy than before. And she said, if you want to become a monk, you have my blessing. Because she had a mother's intuition, she could see that I was happier. But the thing is, I didn't agree with their opinions. And it's not that I didn't want to argue. I just had the insight that arguing with them would be pointless. And it just creates contentiousness. So just allow them to be the way they are. And my mother found that as very profound. Oh, look what happened. My son became this peaceful, non-contentious being. And she was very happy for me. So, yeah. So we have to put 95% of our attention on ourselves. And I think in the Tibetan tradition, they talk about the stubborn people as being our teachers. There are many verses for training the mind, where when you meet a person of very heavy and negative nature, visualize that person on your head as your teacher and thank them for the opportunity of giving you opportunity to practice patience. So say, thank you, my teacher. Well, here comes my teacher again. Another great opportunity to practice patience. Sadhu.
Thank you, Prajan. Prajan, question number 3. Hi, Ajahn. I'm considering to pursue a certification course in clinical hypnotherapy. I would like to ask if performing and receiving hypnosis would affect my meditation practice. Thank you.
I feel a little torn about answering this question because on one level, I recognize that this therapy could be beneficial to certain people in certain situations, where using hypnotherapy to put in deep thought impressions which help a person kind of override negative habits. I can see that, I know that that is skillful and effective in certain cases. At the same time, as a Buddhist practitioner who aspires to liberation from all forms of ignorance and delusion, personally, I wouldn't want to allow myself to be hypnotized. And because the thing about delusion, when we look at the Four Noble Truths, the cause of suffering is craving. craving for, craving not for, craving for being. But the cause of suffering is based upon ignorance, perceiving body and mind as self. And so the root cause is ignorance. What does ignorance mean? Ignorance means not knowing things according to their actual true nature. When you don't know things according to their actual true nature, it is somewhat inevitable that you're going to be deluded. You're going to misapprehend things. So that's delusion, a misapprehension. And the problem with delusion is when you're deluded, you don't know. So a lot of people have a feeling of being right. They know, and they have conviction and they believe their beliefs. But the problem is it's totally deluded in terms of what's ultimate truth. So I, for myself, don't want to make any karma with anything that takes away mindfulness and clear comprehension as to what the body and mind is experiencing in the moment, because that's what I have faith in, that mindfulness and clear comprehension of the body and the mind as it is in the present, deepened and deepened and deepened, is what liberates the mind from all ignorance and delusion. So for myself, I wouldn't. And historically speaking, we can see that cultures go through like mass psychosis, mass delusion. So for example, when Hitler got his Hitler Youth to round up Jews, and at the time, they, you know, the power of propaganda, we live in a conditioned world where there is a lot of greed, hatred, and delusion. And unfortunately, there are psychopaths who rise to powerful, prominent roles because of their ruthlessness. And the problem with psychopaths is they tend to be quite charismatic and persuasive and intelligent. And so, with the help of others, of course, they need to be enabled. But Hitler, Mussolini, Stalin, Mao Zedong, you know, these people with propaganda are able to get millions of people to cooperate with quite evil agendas. And while they're, you know, Mao Zedong's Red Guard, burning down all the temples and beating up all the priests and invading Tibet, etc., the Cultural Revolution, when they were doing it, they thought it was a good thing because they believed the propaganda. And this is a weak point in humanity. If enough people in uniforms tell you something often enough, most people will believe it and go along with it. And this is very scary. And so for myself, I want to have that kind of clarity and common sense, which just pays attention, which is aware. This is propaganda. This doesn't make sense. This isn't ethical. So I don't want to make karma with anything that's going to increase the likelihood that I might be able to be hypnotized and participate in any kind of mass psychosis. And that might mean having, you know, of those few people who saved and rescued Jews, those few people that allowed monks to escape China. There was always a percentage in these situations of good people that refused to be corrupted, who went against the stream and put up resistance and took risks to their own health and safety and well-being to help others because it was the right thing to do. So I want to be the kind of person that has clarity, and I want presence of mind, and I don't want to be able to be hypnotized, propagandized, and deluded. So that's just my take on it. I would not allow myself to be hypnotized, even though I recognize that hypnotherapy can be helpful to people in certain contexts. So.
Yeah. Dear Ajahn, will you consider giving a talk to younger audiences, example, kids around age 6 to 12? My kids enjoy listening to some of your stories, but I'm sure they will love it if the talk is more relevant to them. Thank you so much, Ajahn.
I'm glad your kids enjoy some of my stories. You know, I tend to think that certain people will have a certain like skill set. And personally, I don't think teaching children is my strength. So we have a Meiji in the monastery who's very good with kids, and she enjoys teaching the kids and encouraging the kids. And probably the average age of my audience here is about 50 or 55. And I mean, I can have fun with kids, like sit around and play with them or whatever. And but in terms of like framing Dhamma in a practical way, I just think there are people who have a particular talent, and I don't think that's my particular talent. For myself, if I see anyone under 30, I literally don't know what to say. It's like for people, it's easier to talk to people in their 40s and 50s because they already know about suffering. They already know about, you know, the dreams that you had that got dashed. And these are the people that you can talk to. People in their 20s, you know, they're going to do it. They're going to do it their way, and they just want to be supported in fulfilling their dream. I say, well, all the best with that. And I really hope it works, you know. But in terms of a middle way approach, developing mindfulness and wisdom and knuckling down to spiritual practice, people need to have been kind of sobered and develop a bit of weariness so that they apply themselves in a disciplined way. So yes, I'm I mean, I just don't think I'm the right monk. It's all you jaded middle-aged people. You're my audience. I can relate to you.
There are some young people here, Ajahn.
I love them
every
too.
week.
I love them too.
We can resonate with you too.
Yeah, I just think I was jaded and heartbroken more quickly than most. So I knuckled down earlier in life. So
Thank you, Ajahn.
is that it?
Yep, Prajan. I think it's quite late, and you just came back from Chiang Mai.
Okay.
Chiang Mai.
Yeah, I've had a couple of days at my kitty, which has been very nice.
Can you put our hands in, Angeline, and pay our respect to Prajan now? 3 bows, please. First bow. Second bow. Third bow. Sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Thank you, Kiao.
Thank you, Ajahn.
Thank you, Rajan.
Appreciate your
Good night.
Thank you, Sister Joy.
Nice to spend time with you. Chair cup.
Thank you.
You
Good night,
should give the
Ken.
cat a Dhamma name.
Back up.
What's the name of the cat again, Prajan? Somebody wants to know.
Look Gao, which means jewel ball, jewel ball.
But it's not a Dhamma name. It should be a Dhamma name.
No, you have to understand that the real jewel is boundless compassion, which perceives emptiness. Come on, symbolic meanings.
Okay, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, Ajahn. Thank you.
Good night.